We will soon be hearing from Dr. Eleonoor van Gerven on Alone You Go Faster. Together you can accomplish more, the search for golden moments when improving children's wellbeing at school. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Yugambeh and Kombumerri peoples as the traditional custodians of the lands from which I'm speaking to you today. I recognise their continuing connection to the country, land and waters, and thank them for protecting this coastline, hinterland and its ecosystems since time immemorial. I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all First Nations people present today. Please join me in acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land and country from where you're joining us by posting in the chat. And also, please let us know from where in the world you're joining us today. I just want to give a plug to one of the current research projects we're working on at the moment in gifted education. It's an American Psychological Foundation Esther Katz-Rosenfund grant. So we're seeking gifted Australian teens aged 12 to 19 years to complete an anonymous online survey about their out-of-school uses of generative artificial intelligence. So if you know any gifted teens who might be interested, please pass on the survey details to them, and I send a huge thank you in advance. I'd like to thank the organising team behind the 2025 Gifted Education Symposium series, Mrs. Anna Fowler, Ms. Mary Ellen Feldhagen. So today's presentation will go for an hour, followed by about 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. Please use the dedicated Q&A rather than the chat for any questions for Dr. van Gerven. That way we can actually prioritise and lump questions together, and it's a much better way of facilitating the questions in that regard. So after Eleanor's presentation, Anna will be facilitating the Q&A session, and then we'll thank Dr. van Gerven and conclude the session for 5:30 p.m. As we're almost ready to introduce our presenter, I'd like to just provide an overview of the next and final two upcoming webinars in the 2025 Gifted Education Symposium series. So on Thursday, the 6th of November, 7:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, we have Professor Del Sigley, who will be speaking about increasing motivation for gifted students. And our final session will be myself and Mrs. Clark on Thursday, the 27th of November, presenting our recent research project, Pressing Issues in Australian Gifted Education from Multi-Stakeholder Perspectives. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to many of you who've reached out by email to say how much you're enjoying the webinar series this year. It's really great to get that feedback from you all. So without further ado, it's now my great pleasure to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Eleonoor van Gerven from the Dutch National Knowledge Centre for Gifted Education, whose presentation is titled Alone You Go Faster, Together You Can Accomplish More, the Search for Golden Moments when Improving Children's Wellbeing at School. Dr. Eleonoor van Gerven is Director at Slim Educatief, a private teacher education institute in the Netherlands. She specialised in gifted education and the systemic change and solution-focused approach. She developed a competency matrix for curriculum construction in the domain of gifted education for the continuous professional development of teachers. She developed the postgraduate teacher education specialist in gifted education and the postmaster teacher education specialist in educating twice exceptionals, both accredited by the Dutch Society for Higher Education. In 2014, she received a Mensa Award for the Dutch Mensa Foundation for her contribution to gifted education. In 2018, the Dutch Society for Specialists in Gifted Education granted her a lifelong honorary membership as a reward for her lifelong contribution to gifted education. Since 2023, she has been Vice President of the World Council for Gifted and Talented Children. Dr. van Gerven is also Program Manager of the Dutch National Knowledge Centre for Gifted Education, a government-funded initiative providing free evidence-based information for all stakeholders in gifted education. This centre is currently preparing a national curriculum for teacher education, focusing on the domain of giftedness. Dr. van Gerven's presentation, titled Alone You Go Faster, Together You Can Accomplish More, the Search for Golden Moments when Improving Children's Wellbeing at School, focuses on education, where Van Meersbergen and Jenga 2012 refer to Bronfenbrenner's system as the ecology of the learner. A smaller scale approach that still uses the term learner ecology is introduced by van Gerven 2015. Relevant actors in this system include teachers, parents, learners, and peers, while factors involve the curriculum, pedagogy strategies, and the learner's physical environment. The fundamental principle of ecological thinking is the mutual influence of actors and factors on one another. In this session, we examine the influence of the learner's ecological system on providing a more appropriate education for twice exceptional students in a general group. Small and successful interventions can be found by using a solution-focused and positive psychological approach. These types of intervention strategies can be relatively simply implemented in general education classrooms, even when a formal identification of giftedness and/or a formal diagnosis of disability have not yet taken place. The idea behind the approach is alone you go faster, but together you can accomplish more. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Eleonoor van Gerven. Thank you.
Okay, Michelle, I hope you can all hear me.
Yes.
And if my mic works, okie dokie.
Fabulous.
Are my slides already on, or do I have to reshare again?
Reshare, please, Eleonoor. Thank you.
Okay, there we are. Well, good morning, everybody, or for you, good afternoon. For me, it's really early. After this wonderful introduction, I would like to thank Dr. Ronksley-Pavia to invite me to be here today with you. She has my email address, which is not on the slides. In case you have any questions after today's session, or once you've seen the session on an online recording, feel free to ask Dr. Pavia for my email address and send me an email. You may have spotted it right now, coming from the Netherlands. English is my second language and not my first language. So if you have any difficulty to understand me, or if I'm looking for words for a moment, please bear with me. I try to do my best. Basically, that's all what there is to tell about me. So let's start today. The first bit is that I'd like to tell you something about the dynamics of the ecological system. And in the model I present you, I'd like to think in graphics. And this is one of my graphics, and it's based on Bronfenbrenner theory, but I left out a lot of other things. And basically, I brought it back to the elements of the learner's environment that, as a teacher, you can influence. And as we place the student in the middle, and I made it green due to pay my respects to Robin Shader and Susan Baum about blue and yellow creates green, as in twice exceptional learners. They come in with the yellow bits of their giftedness and the blue bits about having a learning difficulty or disability. And once when you look at the grass is green, or at least in my country is green. And I don't think when I look at the grass, which molecule is actually blue and which molecule is actually yellow. I just accept it's green. And for me, that is the essence of looking at children. We accept them as they are. And if they show characteristics of being gifted and show characteristics of having a learning difficulty, and I'm going to make later on a difference between having a learning difficulty and a learning disability, I accept that the combination of both of them will lead to green behavior. So that's why the middle bit in the circle in this graphic is green. And if you look at being green, that implies that it affects your regulation skills, it affects your academic developments and achievements, and it affects your interpersonal functioning, and it also affects your intrapersonal functioning. So that is here in the middle, and all elements affect each other. So it's not that your regulation skills only affect your academic results, but they also affect all the other ones. And the same applies for everything that is around you. As a teacher, you affect the learner, you affect its learning environment and curriculum, you affect peers, and you affect family. But they also affect each other, as in that is Bromsman-Brenner's Mason system, and by the interaction between all the different factors and actors in the system, the way how they affect you as a learner means that whatever happens at home, it affects children. Whatever happens at school, it affects the learner. And every child in your classroom, being green or not, comes in with its own ecological system. And that means that whether you like it or not, we should thank teachers and we should pay them a huge compliment for the fact that so many things in education are going well, are doing well. Um, because if you have 32 of these molecular systems in your classroom and they also start interacting with one another, it's a hell of a job. So without having said anything, I used to be a kindergarten teacher about 42 years ago. And at the end of the day, I sometimes was surprised with myself that I thought, yeah, I made it. And they all came out in one piece. So basically, this is the learner's ecological system. This is what you have to deal with times 32. That means that whatever I'm going to tell you today should not be really much different from what you are already doing. But what I'm trying to tell you today is how you can do the same things that you are already doing in a slightly more effective way when it comes to twice exceptional learners. Um, in order to do this, I designed what we call a systemic support program. And the fundamentals of that program are we're taking on a systemic approach, as I just explained to you. We use elements from RTI. We use elements from the solution-focused approach, and I prefer to move away from thinking in strengths and weaknesses, and that might raise a few eyebrows. But as soon as you start thinking in strengths and weaknesses, when it comes to education, and that's not because you're in Australia and I'm in the Netherlands, but as soon as you start thinking in strengths and weaknesses, we quite often, as teachers, we start to tweak on the weaknesses and forget that children already also have strength. And if this is a strength and this is a weakness, we start to focus on this one and we try to bring this one, the weaknesses up to the middle, and we've got this part. What I'd like you to do is by moving away from thinking in strengths and weaknesses to focus on the development of the entire learner to the right. So not only help the learner to develop any weaknesses, but also focus on their strength. And therefore, I'd like to talk about talents or characteristics of giftedness and barriers. I once heard an interview with a Dutch singer-songwriter with 5 children, and one of them, in our perspective, misses half an arm. And in the interview said, yeah, but one of your girls misses half an arm. And that singer-songwriter immediately corrected him and said, she's not missing that arm. She's born like that. We are missing her arm. And that opened my eyes in a completely different way, as in, okay, we are missing her arm. So that means that we have to do something in order to make her function in a society that raises a barrier for this kid. In the systemic support program, we have 2 phases. It's a systemic exploration and the systemic intervention. And most of our time is being invested, as you will see later on, in setting up a proper exploration without getting a formal diagnosis. Once you've done that systemic exploration properly, inventing or coming up with a systemic intervention is relatively easy, and it saves you a lot of time. And when does it save you time? It does save you time at the moment that you need both of your hands and your time desperately, and that's while you were teaching. The systemic exploration can take place before you teach, when children work independently, etc., etc. But the systemic intervention has to take place when they are working, when you are needed in a classroom. So whatever you come up with, or whatever parents come up with, or the learners come up with, it has to be doable. Um, I also am moving away from the terminology a bit of being twice exceptional, because the approach works, as I said, for all learners, but I prefer to talk about hard to understand behavior, because if I tell you this child is twice exceptional, what I'm basically doing is child blaming. It's about telling you you're missing half an arm. Um, and um, what I'd like to think about is we feel slightly more incompetent when we find it difficult to understand the learner's behavior. So, what you first need to do is learn how to understand the behavior that you find hard to understand. And if you know how to understand it, how to interpret a learner's behavior, responding becomes more easy. You will see that during the presentation. We're not limiting it to special educational needs. It's not only focused on the academic curriculum, it can be focused on behavior as well, as long as behavior does not come up first. Well, this is the bullet number 4 already discussed. So that means that being in a pre-diagnostic stage doesn't mean that you can't act. You can't tell a child, oh, yeah, you may have characteristics of being gifted, and I'm very sorry that you also have difficulty in learning reading, spelling, and writing, but we're going to wait until we have diagnosed it formally before we act, because that can take months and will cost a lot of money. And in the meanwhile, instead of that child growing a bit, it shrinks a bit. What we're trying to do is we aim for a positive change in the current situation. So we're not discussing as in, is the glass half full or is it half empty? The only relevant question is, where do I find the glass to fill, a tap to find to fill up the glass? This requires reflection on practice and theory, and I prefer that to call it the professional interval. As teachers, we think we can never ever take a pause to sit down and just to observe what goes on. Basically, the most important tool as a teacher you have is yourself, or your eyes and your ears. Use them. Let's see. What do I have to tell about this one? Um, what I'd like to do is that teachers start doing the systemic exploration, not only of the students' traits, but also of the environmental responses on those traits. How do you affect those traits? How do you affect the learner's behavior? You all know that when you're very tired and you pick up your kids, and for some reason you always appear to pick them up when they are tired and when you were tired at the end of a working day, and when you pick up your kids, that you might feel slightly on edge when they start asking questions. You think, yeah, but I still have to run some errands and have to cook you a meal, and one plays violin lessons and should train, and one goes to ballet and should train. Um, and only the stress you feel at that moment already affects your kids. So that means that every parents, not only teachers, but also parents affect their kids, but also learners affect other learners, affect the other learners in the classroom. And the only way to solve a problem is to get up and set up a joint factors, a joint venture with the actors. And a joint venture will only work if all the owners, all the partners feel ownership, take agencies for whatever they do. Um, as a parent, you can't say, yeah, but it happens at school, so it's not my problem. Or as a school, you can't say it's happening at home, so it's not my problem. Basically, it is your problem because that kid comes to school every morning with everything that happened between the day before and that morning. And at the end of the day, children go home with everything between their ears and in their body with that happened from the moment they arrived at school until the moment they go home. Um, and again, you focus on the solution. And for me, a multidisciplinary team of experts is not essential to get the show on the road. Obviously, you might need them during the process, um, and you might need a formal diagnosis after some time, but to start, you don't have to wait. And I prefer people to be greedy. I don't know if you have them in Australia, but in the Netherlands, we have conferences, and during those conferences, there are open marketplaces for school publishers. You can buy books, you can buy other stuff, and there's also a lot of stuff for free. And if you go around, you see people grabbing the stuff that is for free and putting it all in their bags. I do the same. I'm Dutch. I have deep pockets and very short arms. Um, and so obviously my bag is filled at the end of the day. And for people being greeting during those days, it represents for me, I want to show you things that are tiny, small, it's for free, it doesn't cost you a lot. Although even at start, you may think, oh my goodness, what I'm about to do. But in the end, it appears to be very small. Now let's look at the flow chart of the process of the systemic exploration. Um, and if I go too fast, feel free to put your questions in the chat for Anna as she's moderating. The first step during the systemic exploration is that you have to define the need for change. What is actually the need for change? And it means that you all have to acknowledge that there are difficulties. And when you look at the gifted learners, they're bright. They the characteristics of giftedness means that they won't learn if you put them outside and wait until it rained and then thinks, oh, it's rained in. Yeah, obviously they know it. But they are bright. They do understand a lot. So if you have a child in your classroom and you see that it's not making any homework, and you start the question is, um, do you think that things can go better when you start making your homework? The child already know with the second word you say, oh, she's going to talk about my homework. And if it tells you, I couldn't care less, this child already predicts itself. If I tell my teacher I couldn't care less, this is going to be a very lengthy conversation. So obviously the kid says, yeah, I think you're right. It has to do with the fact that I didn't make my homework. That means, conversation finished. But that child doesn't feel any agency for the difficulties there are. It just gives you the answer you would like to hear. So it means everybody has to acknowledge that there are difficulties and how to get there. We're going to talk about it later on. That means that you start to describe the situation based on facts and not based on your interpretation. So if a child looks outside the window, you describe the child as looking outside the window and not it's dreaming or it's wandering off because you don't know that. He might or she might be fully interested and listening, but not displaying the listening face or the interested face you might expect from other children. And you describe the ecological responses, so describe the way how other learners respond, how you respond, how parents respond. The second step in the systemic exploration is that I want you to focus on the golden moments. And a golden moment um, is a moment, and the underpinning is a problem is not always there, even if it's only away for 10 seconds. That means during those 10 seconds, everybody is highly skilled and highly competent, because during those 10 seconds, as a teacher, you do the right thing. The curriculum is a perfect match. The learning environment is a perfect match. There's a good match with all the other learners. And parents obviously have done something right. And the kid itself is doing something right. Because otherwise, during those 10 seconds, the problem would be there. It would be present. So start finding those golden moments. When is the need for change less severe or not even present at all? Step 3, you analyze that golden moment. And basically, you do exactly as you did on step 1, but now you focus on what goes right. So you describe the situation, you describe the ecological responses, and I prefer to do teachers to analyze their information in Excel or in Word, not because you need the math, but you can make 2 columns equally, and you can make an easy comparison. So in one column, column 1, you said define the need for change and your observation. Column 2, you set up the golden moments on the exact same criteria. And in column 3, you analyze and you describe the differences, or in column 4, you describe the differences between the golden moments and the need for change. And what are the differences? I once had a teacher, and we videoed her because she had a child in the classroom, and it didn't listen at all. It didn't listen at instructions. It didn't know what to do while working. And she explained to us whatever she did, and we thought, she's giving instructions, she's taking the time, she's stopping at the kid every so many minutes, and when she's doing her classroom service rounds, and we didn't understand it, so we started videoing her, and we saw her sitting her next to the student, and then we realized when we analyzed the video that the learner's behavior changed as soon as she was sitting not next to the learner, but opposite the learner. And as I have a deaf nephew, I suddenly realized there's only one problem. This kid is as bright as a button, but it just can't hear. And the problem is away. The need for change is less severe when the child is able to read the teacher's lips. And when the teacher is sitting next to her, she couldn't hear her and she needed to focus on what's on her table. And she did not have the opportunity to read the teacher's lips. And we tried it out, and then we got an we got the parents to a specialist, and yes, the kid needed a hearing aid. You couldn't have helped that. We couldn't have helped it. The parents couldn't have helped it. Kid couldn't have helped it. But basically, analyzing that moment after 7 years, because the child was already about 7, they finally found out that their kid had a hearing problem. Next step, after you analyze the results, you do something else. You think about the, and again, this is the flow chart, so I'm telling you this all in a couple of minutes. It takes a little bit of time to exercise with it in your daily practice. The next step is that you describe the ideal situation, as in, and it's the question from Kim in Zuberg, as in, suppose that you're in tomorrow morning at school, and the problem has disappeared entirely. What are you looking at? Because the ideal situation, you give it on a flow on a scale from 1 to 10. You rate it as a 10, as in that is ideal. The second step is, if this is ideal, I'm going to score the need for change in the present situation. What am I? Am I already a 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever? And you may focus as in, we are a 3. Okay, you are already a 3. Well done. What have you done? What is it in the current situation that makes you say it is already a 3? And those are the elements you need to hold on to. That are the elements as in, okay, we made an inventory. This is already going well. Third step into the intervention towards an intervention is set your goal. The ideal situation should not be your goal. The ideal situation, that's the dream. You may end up there after a year or maybe even after 2 years. But your goal, your next goal is how do I or how do we in the current situation with the ecological system move towards a 3.5 or maybe even a 4? That is already a very large step. And it means that between the 3 and the 3.5, the interventions you can come up with can be relatively small because whatever you do, you all need success on a very short notice. Once you've set your goal, as in this is how this is what it looks like when the situation is scored by us as a 3.5 or maybe a 4, we're going to formulate golden sentences. And I get back later on to those sentences, but basically they imply already a part of the solution. Together with the golden sentences, you design a solid intervention plan. You implement the plan and please do monitor results. Do not only monitor the process, but monitor both. And what I see most in Dutch schools is that when people say, whatever, we've done so many interventions over the past years and we were not successful at all. When I make an analysis of what happened before, I can see that quite often after a fortnight they quit, as in it doesn't work, so we quit, or the kid doesn't like it, so we quit, or it's too big, so we quit. And sometimes people start doing 20 things at the same time, 20 different interventions at the same time to solve a problem. I guarantee you that's not going to work. It's 19 things too much. And it's not only 19 things too much, but it's also, you can't make a distinction what was actually the working component. So we're going to do this step by step. Is that frustrating? Yes. If you were in my class as a teacher student, by the time it would be Christmas, I would annoy the hell out of you because the only thing I'm saying to you, we're going to make it slightly smaller. No, it should be even more smaller again. And I actually sometimes during Christmas, I get a hate mail from a student. And once I get I got an email like that, and exactly a year later, that former student, sent me an email, and she said to me, "You gave me a swift kick in the proverbial place, and I needed it, but I just didn't realize it. I wasn't watching and attending the learner's needs. I was attending my needs, and so yes, I needed that kick in the butt." And in the end, you evaluate the process and then you get in at somewhere between um, a step 2 and 3, as in, okay, keep in mind the ideal situation. You wanted to become a 3 or a 4. What have you achieved? What have you accomplished? In this process, and I noticed that I missed a letter here. It should say just like here, Steinkorix. It's an abbreviation. Whatever you do during the process, you start stimulating what the needs of the learner, and you stimulate the learner by creating opportunities for talent development, and you do that first. So whatever you do, talent development should come first. And I explain it to you very easy. When you feel not competent and you feel confronted with incompetence during the entire day and you don't understand yourself, as in my mind everything goes right and when I'm doing it everything goes wrong, that creates a paradoxical need. It also creates a problem with understanding yourself, and that creates frustration, and that creates a lot of stress because as a child, I cannot meet anybody's expectations about me being maybe having a high learning potential. I can't even meet my own standards. Creating stress means that if this is stress and these are your executive skills, stress and executive skills use exactly the same neurological highway. So once your stress level raises, the ability, the opportunity to use that highway for executive functioning and regulation skills goes slightly down the drain. And the more we start pulling grass, the more the stress level raises, because once you start pulling grass, the grass will grow faster. And the opportunity to use your executive skills goes really down the drain. The more we focus on what goes wrong, the higher the stress level goes, the less executive skills you will see. And one thing all twice exceptional learners or all learners with hard to understand behavior share is that their executive functioning or their executive skills might be in trouble. If you have autism or you have ADHD, it's the functioning that creates a problem. But if you are dyslexic or you have dyscalculia, it's not the function, it's not the neurological wiring that causes the problem. What causes the problem is the stress that during the entire day you are doing things that you find very hard to do. So one thing you do is you start to take away the things that causes the most stress. And obviously you can't take away it forever and you can't take away everything. But once you start taking away the stress, the executive skills come up again. And it means that you will see a different learner. Because one of the things that comes with your executive functioning is also the regulation of your emotions. And one of the things we hear from teachers about their twice exceptional learners in their classroom or their children with hard to understand behavior is the meltdowns, the angriness, the sadness, as in, I don't understand who I am. And once you start to take away the stress, you will see that children are even better, even without any explanation, better to regulate their emotions during the learning process. The second thing you start to stimulate, because you're a school, you're a teacher, and therefore you do have the obligation to do something with it, is that you start creating a stimulating environment for that specific learner with those characteristics of giftedness to develop themselves in the domain of the learning or behavioral disability. And you're not done with that, because the second step is you start helping the kid to compensate. Keep in mind that these learners, before they were recognized as having hard to understand behavior or twice exceptional or whatever name you want to give them, underachievement, I couldn't care less, they have been hanging on up to their nails onto the rooftop quite often for years. Those kids are deadly, deadly, deadly tired. They even might almost drop down on the floor, and you might lose them for education. They are so tired. Keep that in mind. And it means that by the time you found them, their own ability to compensate for the time being, it's gone. They're too tired. So that means that the first compensation should come from us, as in the ecological support. And please don't start training them with using their strength in order to compensate their weakness, because that means that we're teaching children basically you're not good, you're not good at all. We're going to tweak you, and you have to do whatever you can to compensate for what you can't do. Please don't do that. Let them grow as an entire child. So if they need compensation, try to see what you can do, what the environment can do, based on the curriculum, the physical environment, parents, whatever you can do to be that support system, to create the scaffolds the learner needs, instead of expecting the child to create its own scaffolds. But then you can't avoid remediation. So somewhere remediation should come into the story. And these are the things that whatever you come up with, you stimulate, you compensate at the same time, and then you start remediating. And therefore, remediation, children will feel only agency for remediation if they're attracted by the way how you present the opportunities to develop the skills that are necessary for the kid to learn. But please use the idea of the approach, the gifted approach to learning, the fact that they may have dyscalculia and having a problem with math doesn't mean that they are slow in understanding things, because they're even faster in understanding how it works than children with an average intelligence, but they might not understand how things work in math at the same pace as gifted learners who don't have dyscalculia. So if you start offering remediation, don't let them take very tiny little steps, but slightly enlarge the step until you see, okay, this is actually the zone of the learner's proximal development. And that means that as soon as you enter that zone as a child, or even as an adult, you need support. So you're going to find out what is the support that this child needs in order to function in that zone of proximal development. And that is where you offer the strategies and tools for compensation. And that is how you start with your instructional and didactical strategies. And that's the thing that's nearest and dearest to my heart. Think about exemption on a temporary basis, as in not for always, but please accept that being too eager or having a learning difficulty or learning disability, I should say, comes with limitations in the domain of the disability. You are gifted for the rest of your life, they are gifted for the rest of their lives, but they also have a disability for the rest of their life. And the difference between a difficulty and a disability is the level of resistance for remediation. So if you stimulated the learner, you compensated the learner, and you remediated the learner, and you will experience that the growth is there's a ceiling to what a child can do. For that time being, please accept a temporary exemption and give it another try after 6 months to see if you and the kid are able to set a next step, and maybe not even in 6 months, but maybe even a year later. And also remember that even whatever you do here, it doesn't go away. And take my word for it, I don't want to say I'm gifted, but I'm severely dyslexic, and I don't know. I do know that whatever you do, it doesn't go away. Now, does it actually work? Because you've heard me speaking, I think, rather passionately um, um, about all the things that I believe in, I strongly believe in. Um, and we did some research to prove that it actually works. And I'm not going to take all the way you through the research, so I'm going to skip a lot of slides. Um, and for those of you who are really bored in their spare time and like to do a bit of reading in late 2023, early 2024, I published an article in Journal of the Education of the Gifted on this research. So I'm going to take you all through this in maybe 5 or 6 minutes and then spend the rest of my time talking about Tommy. And Tommy is an actual kid, it's an actual case. But what we did after 10 years data collection, as in Michelle already mentioned that I'm director of a teacher educating institute, and we have set up a course, a 2-year project for teachers, 16 days in training in 2 years. And in year 2, they all do an individual case study. And after 10 years, we wanted to know how successful these teachers were. And 78 of those teachers gave us permission to use the data they presented for their final project. Um, and we had two central questions. We wanted to develop a better understanding of how teachers experience the use of the program and if the if the systemic support program increased their success while working with TUI learners. I'm going to skip this one. And of our 78 teachers, um, um, we saw, and I see that not my entire, hey, I'm missing a part of the table. But most of them worked in a regular classroom. We had full-time special class teachers. We had educational needs coordinators, and we had teachers who came in for special projects. Let's see, I'm going to skip that. Limitations to the study. This study was part of a wider evaluation regarding a teacher education course. And that means that we had a specific population of our teachers. Um, they were already skilled and gifted ads. They were highly committed. And so that means that we had a special population of our teachers. And as a reflection is a subjective element in everybody's life. Teachers' reflections on their own competencies are subjective. Um, there was enough material for triangulation, but it cannot be disclosed to you as it is part of close personal student progress file. So these records are sealed. We could use that data, but I cannot present that bit of the data. What are the findings? Because I'm going to skip all the statistics because that's boring. But what did we found when we looked at the original need for change teachers described during the process? And what they experienced was that the process led to reduce problematic behavior that resulted originally in frustration, so it reduced the meltdowns. It provided a better understanding for the interplay between giftedness and the barriers the learners experience, and therefore creating a better understanding for children what goes on, but also for their parents and for you as a teacher. It provided that people were trying to focus firstly in addressing the learner's disability. So whatever we told them, everything we told them, everything we trained them, it appeared to be forgotten as soon as they were back in the classroom, because all the actors were focusing on the disability about, and basically maybe that's only Dutch that we prefer to look at things that go wrong, but looking at things that go right is rather difficult. because the focus is on what goes wrong for already 125 years. And in none of the cases, the original need for change included addressing the learner's giftedness. And we consider that as strange because even children themselves said, they didn't say, I want to know everything about oceans, or I'm very skilled in making stop motion films, or no, if you ask them what does need for change, they said, I wanted to make friends. I wanted to understand myself better. I want to learn how to read without difficulties, or I wanted to do the math without difficulties. So they completely forgot about the fact that they were gifted. They were so focused like a rabbit in cars headlights, and they couldn't move. The only thing they could do is with their the shoulders in their ears focus on this is what goes wrong, instead of please let your shoulders go down and let's start thinking about what goes right. The needs for change were rephrased at the end of the systemic exploration, and that need for rephrase meant that we were able to steer away from a deficit-oriented approach and bringing the giftedness. Now, looking at the golden moments, as said, everybody was focused on the deficits and not on the golden moments. And we were talking about which students, and whatever happened, we couldn't get it right until we started to ask one simple question. Where is giftedness in this story? So we ask parents, or we ask our teacher students to ask the parents, where's your child's giftedness? We ask them to ask their co-workers, or maybe even themselves, where's my learner's giftedness? And the child, where is your giftedness in this story? And what they realized, as soon as they brought in giftedness back in the game, they were able to recognize the golden moments. And that made it relatively easy because all the golden moments were connected to the learner's giftedness. And therefore, their golden moments became a promise for the future instead of the deficit became a warning for the future. Those um, golden sentences, as you will see later on, start with, I think things go better if. And every educational partner, parents, teacher, and child, and sometimes there were also peers involved as educational partners, um, um, became positive change agents, and it created a growing awareness that it takes a village to raise a child. So everybody was allowed to say after that exploration, I think things will go better if I, and not, I think that things will go better if the parents, or I think that things will go better if you as a teacher, or I think that things will go better if you as a learner. No, a golden sentence is focused on your own behavior, as in how can you affect the situation in a positive way. Reports on results again. Teachers told us we didn't need any new skills. We could use our already existing competences. And what we found amazing in those 78 cases is that progress to set objectives were reported, and to the set objectives were, so basically they were all successful. How did teachers reflect on the systemic exploration? They were able to develop a better understanding of the essence of the need for change. They started to understand I'm part of the problem, and that means that I'm also part of the solution. Um, they started to understand how their instant interpretation of situations and their observations sometimes created barriers to change, and that focusing on the learner's deficits does not address the actual need for change. And we found that amazing. Um, they also realized that appropriate interventions, and I think the best one that I found was this one, that time is of the essence. There are no quick fixes. You can't fix a kid. The kid is already good as it is. It doesn't need to be fixed. But there are no quick fixes to what you find hard to understand. Um, um, Everything is setting up custom made. They learn not to skip steps in the process, and daring to focus on the small need for change is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of strength. And it means that effectively striving for small changes is the engine that is needed for a long time process. Seeing educational partnership with the parents, with the learner, sometimes with the other learners, that was seen as a core fundament for change. Um, One teacher said to me, I can only solve a problem. Now I've learned to see that I sometimes am part of the solution, and that means that I'm not the person who should solve the problem. I can solve a problem by seeing myself as a part of the solution. There are other elements involved as well. Um, Other teachers said, success does not only depend on me, success depends on the way how we collaborate during this process. And they started to communicate more effectively with the other educational partners. So they were not only no longer broadcasting as in, oh, we're having a teacher parent conference or meeting, and I'm going to tell you this is your kid and this is what goes wrong and this is what goes right. Unfortunately, there's hardly anything that goes right. Most of the things go wrong. So you should do something about your nasty kid. No, it's about we're doing it together. It does not only depend on me, but I have to stop broadcasting. I have to start listening, really listening to everybody that is involved. Um, and they start to understand the necessity for addressing giftedness prior to the learning disability. Were they all happy with me? No, they were not. And I'm going to tell you later on about that. Back to the central questions. At the end of our research, we concluded that the participating teachers felt that their competencies had increased, that the program creates customized interventions, or using the program creates customized interventions. And as a teacher, that you can use your own creativity to get them. They were highly successful. It had become their roadmap. And then they come up with something and they said, basically, whatever you taught us, it applies for all learners. It does not only apply for a very limited group. I can do this for all children in my classroom where I find it difficult to understand their behavior. Time investment in the systemic exploration is of the essence, and time investment sometimes may conflict with school policy, because often I see that administrators would like you and parents would like you to start acting, as in come up with your intervention, and then our teacher student said yes, but the exploration in itself is an intervention in itself, because we realized that as soon as we started taking the time to explore the current situation, it meant that we have had enough time to uh, uh, we started to communicate differently. That meant already a change. We started to take time for one another. So it took the sting out of the bee bite. So basically, they said the exploration itself was, without knowing it, the best intervention we could do. Now, in the last couple of minutes, and I never know how much time I've left, but I'm going to tell you about Tommy. And Tommy, as said, is a boy that exists. Tommy is, I think he's almost 18 by now. And this is not really Tommy. Obviously, it's a photo from a stock agency because I had to make some changes to make sure that nobody will recognize Tommy as being our Tommy. What happened? Tommy had severe meltdowns, and severe meltdowns, as I mean in severe meltdowns, maybe even involving safety of other children in the classroom. His assignments were never finished. There was a behavioral pattern that started with restlessness. Then he started to share his feelings of being incompetent, very loud and clear. I can never do this. I will never be able to do this. And then after his feeling desperate, you could see that anger was coming up. So he started slapping the table, throwing his coursework through the classroom, and there was only a minor meltdown. Because I've seen a video where furniture was able to fly through the classroom. I never knew furniture could fly, but after having seen this video, I'm now for sure furniture can fly. And then he ran off and he hid behind the cloak rack. That was the only safe space for him in the entire school. The everything was behind the cloak rack. So obviously, I do understand this was a problem. And I forgot to tell you, Tommy was about 9 years old when it happened. He was at a regular school, but in a special class for children with twice already in a special class for children with TUI needs. So there were only 5 other children. There was one teacher, and sometimes that teacher needed support in her classroom as well. Now let's see what sets off the explosion. What happened? Why? What caused the actual meltdown? And the analysis was the actual meltdown came from as soon as it were regular classroom assignments, wherein Tommy experienced time limits, when the demands were unclear or ambiguous for him, when he thought that he might experience personal failure, or where he did experience personal failure in situations where his classmates were successful. So basically, the entire day, everything you do as a teacher could cause a meltdown with Tommy. Now, looking at Tommy, who was Tommy? Tommy was a highly creative thinker. He was very investigated. He loved to do research. He had a very sophisticated vocabulary. He wanted to be good. He wanted to achieve. He hadn't lost that. He had a great eye for details. He had an advanced level of reasoning. He had advanced ideas and interest about how to solve world problems, how to solve the problems in his direct environment, and had a wide range of interests. And obviously, at the moments when Tommy was doing well, you could see he was as bright as a button. But Tommy was also very easily distracted. He had a very, very, very slow processing speed, even compared to children with an average intelligence. He had a lot of difficulties and deficits in planning, prioritizing, and organization. Basically, His brain was from rubber, as it went all over the place. And yes, he could fill in a planet, but he never made it. Um, he was no longer, he wasn't able to organize not only his working space around him, but not even within a task, he was able to organize its own behavior. His motivation at school was extrinsic. Um, he got lost in details. He had weak motoric skills. He had absolutely no sense of time whatsoever. Um, Even though he was, and that was interesting, his parents thought he could read clock, he could read the time by the age of 3, but he didn't have a sense of time. So he could tell you, if you ask him, what time is it today? He could tell you, oh, it's 9:05. And then you could say, what does it mean about the past hour? And he could look at you and say, is there an hour gone or not? And he found it very difficult to express his feelings. He had feelings, obviously. He had difficulties in expressing them in a way that we would find them acceptable. And he couldn't control his frustration. Well, if you combine this, you can imagine what happened. Now, what were the ecological influences on who Tommy was? The ecological influences was the teacher emphasized on personal responsibility and created critical thinking. The curriculum, as the teacher did a course on gifted ads, was based on 21st century didactics and was based on knowledge construction, was based on top-down learning, etc., etc. In the learning environment, there was lots to explore. And I always, whenever I see this photo, I think if I didn't have ADHD, I spontaneously would develop ADHD in a classroom like this. His peers were highly competitive. They aimed for interaction because they enjoyed Tommy, because he had a great sense of humor. And his parents um, 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 had high expectations, and I told Tommy, if you practice enough, it makes you perfect. But Tommy responds not very effectively to the ecological requirements, as in he wasn't able to take care of the responsibility at school as a teacher required or is required when you are in knowledge construction and using 21st century skills. He had explicit problems with executive skills. There were way too much opportunities for unstructured exploration that created his panic attacks. He had persevering problems in social interaction and he was obsessed with perfect results. Well, if these are the responses to the way your ecological environments affect you, you can create a meltdown. What were his golden moments? Basically, his golden moments were project work for history and geography, when he was encouraged to do research, and the teacher allows him afterwards to tell spontaneously, what did you discover? What did you know? And then he could go on and tell you all about what he'd learned, what he'd seen, what he explored, and you could see the depth of level of knowledge that he developed. And his face was shining. It was so bright. And then they started to see when are the problems less severe. Problems were less severe when the teacher visualized the stages of the learning process and shared responsibility and time management. Problems were also less severe when the curriculum relates. I'm going to ask, am I allowed to finish this bit of the presentation? If not, they're going to cut me short.
Of course, please do. Thanks, Eleonoor.
Okay. When the curriculum started to relate to his interest in the subject or the project, when educational objectives were set smart, when the learning environment was more structured and limited stimuli, when peers learned to value individual achievements instead of competing with each other, And when there was little interaction during the learning moments, and as long as Tommy did not have to collaborate with other children, things were going well. And when his parents helped to set up realistic goals and celebrate success instead of you need to be high achiever because you are so brilliant. In the ideal situation, they all described, I wanted to learn, and Tommy is most, I wanted to learn how to regulate my emotions during the day because my meltdowns cost me a lot of energy, and Tommy finishes his assignments before the deadline. They scored the situation already a 4, as a 4 because the teacher had a good pedagogical relationship with Tommy. There were opportunities to match the curriculum with Tommy's interest. He had a favorite working spot in the classroom. Other kids liked him, and the parents had a good balance between letting go and protecting their kid. So that was a good thing to start. The 4 would become a 5, as in when Tommy learned to get a bit of understanding for time, and they said one less meltdown per day. Not no meltdowns, just one less. That he was able to use in a time spot before a meltdown came. And to finish only one assignment a day, not all the assignments. When he didn't see every assignment as a competition with the others, and if we all could see baby steps as a success and progress. The golden sentences, creating a book of wisdom. That's how Tommy called it. He said, I'm going to create a book of wisdom, and on each page, I'm going to note something that is wisdom. And those were his golden sentences. And from all the golden sentences, Tommy was allowed to select one thing that he really considered to be important. Developing his talents, when doing so, getting a bit of autonomy, knowing precisely what he was expected to do, learning how to recognize my competences, and Tommy gets help, etc., etc. But this might make you greedy, but it's way too much. So they brought it back to something they could do all. The plan. Tommy chose a topic. 1. He was allowed to use a Spotify playlist to stay focused. He learned to use the time timer and he used the time in spot. Those were Tommy's actions. The teacher learned for that one topic to set SMART goals, used a rubric for the task to clarify the goals. She helped Tommy to organize the task. They set a realistic deadline and not an idealistic deadline. And she started to support Tommy's time management, as in giving him, hey, you still have 5 minutes, or you only have 10 minutes, and it's now time to finish and to wrap it up. The curriculum was already structured in the way it was presented. They kept on higher order thinking skills assignments, but they made sure that there was enough support, so it became also a combination of a compacted and an enriched curriculum for that own topic. And in this case, it was language arts. Physical learning environment. And think about it, this case took place 10 years ago, so not every kid in a Dutch classroom at that time had a laptop. So he got a laptop. They started to hold on to a clean desk policy, and Tommy was allowed to use a headphone while using Spotify when he was using the playlist. Peers, they let him work alone for now, and they respected the rules for the timing spot. So once he was in the timing spot, everybody know this is his time alone. He's charging his batteries. We're not going to disturb him. Parents, they learn to focus on the perception of experiences instead of the achievements, and they learned how to help and find adequate and acceptable. Was the entire IEP on one slide, not more. It's a lot, and they decided we're going to do this for 6 consecutive weeks, and whatever happens, we're going to stick to the plan. So instead of writing a plan like this, they brought it back, and everything they did was doable for them for a time frame of 6 weeks on a daily basis for one subject, for one topic, and whatever they did, it only applied to that little moment during the day. Now you want to know how it ends. We already had that one. Tommy used the checklist, the entire plan on a weekly basis, and he checked just by giving it a stamp, a green or a red or an orange stamp, done it. Not only if he did it, but also if the teacher, the parents, if all the elements were there. And if Tommy was not successful, he could spot immediately, oh yeah, but my teacher forgot this, or my parents forgot that, or I didn't do that, or we didn't arrange for that. So they could spot immediately when there was a red stamp, if Tommy wasn't successful, it was likely we forgot something. And they made a rubric of the tasks that were finalized. So the chart, the plan was the control graphic, and after 6 weeks they evaluated. And after 6 weeks they concluded we were very successful with everything except that Tommy never ever started to work on his enrichment tasks. So he did regular work that was compacted. They created about 40% of its time on that specific subject for enrichment task, and he didn't start it, and nobody understood it. And then I said, have you sat down with Tommy and talked about it? Have you asked him why? And everybody was looking at me and said, oh, that's an idea. Let's talk to the kid. And then he said something, and I already knew that there were, you may have spotted it, that there were also characteristics not only of ADHD, but also of autism spectrum. And then Tommy said, yeah, but I can't do my enrichment task. And they said, why can't you do them? Are they too hard? Are they too difficult? No, he said, I can't do them because my playlist that I selected, that is for the regular work, and I don't have a Spotify playlist that I can use for enrichment tasks. So as long as I don't have that list, I just can't start doing my enrichment work. So they gave him the opportunity to set up a second playlist, specifically that he would like to do for his enrichment work, and he used that. And within a week, his enrichment work was finished. And the funniest thing of the entire story was for the regular work, he used relatively slow music, slightly classic. And then I said to him, am I allowed to listen in for a moment at your playlist? And he said, yeah, of course. You want a headset? So yeah, please give me a headset. So I put on a headset, and then he put on the enrichment playlist. And I had the idea that I ended up at a headbanging party where the noise was like a series of chainsaws going around. It was like this. And he said, yeah, I need that to stimulate myself. And if I have that, I can do my enrichment tasks. Basically, it was that simple. And that made all the difference. Thank you for your time. I stop sharing my screen. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask and to go on.
Fantastic. Can everybody please, I can see the reactions coming through. Thank you so much. That was amazing. I've really appreciated, you talked about golden moments, but I feel like you've given us golden information. So thank you so much for that. And having that example at the end of Tommy to actually see how it would work, how it has worked in that real life situation. I do have a question around Tommy. What do you do in terms of how do you manage, 5 to 10 Tommies in one room in terms of the management side of things? You just, there were lots of things to monitor and set up, which obviously takes time. How do you do that when you have multiple Tommies?
Yeah, well, basically, you are not going to monitor everything by yourself. So we involve, these are bright kids. And we quite often forget that bright children are quite often very curious. And a lot of them love statistics, as in, even if they have mathematical problems, they love to see progress. They love to see what goes better. So what we quite often do is we involve children into their own observations. So we ask children for example, can you, as we asked Tommy, we gave him the flow chart, we gave him that one slide with the plan on the slide. And we said, can you, instead of giving your teacher an additional job, can you set a stamp every week? If it's a red, a green, or an orange stamp, we quite often ask them to record a small video at the end of the day, what we would call a 1-minute video. And can you tell me in 1 minute what you like best today? Can you evaluate the day in 1 word? Can you evaluate the task in 1 word and write the word down on a tiny little notepad and put it in a piggy bank? And at the end of the week, after school, we're opening up the piggy bank and we see what are the notes that are in it, and we let children make a selection of if there are 20 notes in it and we only have time to discuss one. Take the time to decide which one of those 20 notes you want to discuss with us. But you can only select one. That teaches children immediately to see things in perspective, as in, what is the most important thing for me to discuss with my teacher? So we involve them in monitoring the process on their own. I always try teachers to help them to find their balcony moment, as in, I'm Dutch, we have a king and queen, and once a couple of times a year, they're standing on the balcony watching all the people and waving around. So I try to teach my teachers to take 2 minutes a day for every learner in their classroom on the moment that it's needed most for that student, to take a balcony moment and to stand still on a spot where you can oversee your entire classroom and you can see what goes on during the 2 minutes with that kid. If we make observations, there are tools involved, as in we use a lot of videos, as in we have there's an opportunity where you can put your mobile phone on a static device and you can walk around the classroom with a pendant and you can press a button and then your mobile device, it's an app, you can use, and it starts recording. You can watch the recording afterwards, because you can't do that when you're teaching, actually.
Yeah.
So we use a lot of stuff like that. We learn teachers how to trust their learners' eyes and ears, because that's one of the things we quite often do not trust. We trust our own eyes and ears. But it's a kid, it has eyes, it has ears, it can listen, it does have an idea about what happens, and we start to teach teachers to trust the eyes and ears of a parent.
Mm-hmm.
And that is important. So that
Very
takes
much.
you the time to monitor. And again, if you have to do something with math or whatever, as I said, quite often children at a very young age like statistics. They like to see growth. So we sometimes give them Lego blocks, Lego bricks, build it if they're still able, if they're not able to make a chart or a graphic on paper, but still in a time of building, start building your own tower. Don't use loose bricks, but use Lego, because they won't, if it tumbles down, it won't break.
Yes, it won't break.
Yeah, so stuff like that.
Yeah, great. That's a great tool. I've just got one question from the audience. So from participants, it's someone who's quite familiar with the gifted education system in Australia. But the question is more towards the systems approach in terms of that macro and ecosystem organisation. So the policies and guidelines often don't reach our schools directly in terms of what you would say, what the policies and guidelines don't seem to direct us in terms of these gifted and twice exceptional students. But is this similar to the Netherlands? So in terms of your research, how has your research been able to influence education in your context? Can you briefly talk towards that? So how have you been able to shape the Netherlands to be able to take this on board?
I'm in this field since 1988. And one thing that I've learned over time, that if you want sustainable change, you start thinking about evolution and not about revolution. So that means that in our perspective, you also have to take very small steps in what you want to accomplish. I want to change the world, but I can only change the world by putting a stone into water, into the river, because as soon as I place a stone in the river, it will change its course forever. And I accept that change will take time. Change that lasts needs time to develop. It needs to polish the stone. And as soon as that stone is polished, I can place another stone in the river. So yes, I do understand that you want to go faster. And again, alone you go faster, but you need to do it as a community. And that means that whatever you do as a community, it means that the interventions that I'm teaching you should be good for all learners in your classroom. And as long as I keep on doing that, I get people on board. Over the last 40 years, I trained, I think about 5,000 to 10,000 teachers in the major courses. And I see them coming back every year on all kinds of activities. And if every teacher can make once a year a difference for one learner in their classroom, that is about 4,000 children over the last 40 years, times every year they are on the job where I'm not there, we get a lot of things accomplished.
Yeah, That's amazing. Thank you. Small ripples, and small steps with our students. I think that's some wonderful
And
things to
start in
take
your
away.
own community. Don't get focused on what you can't do, but get focused on what you can do in your own classroom.
Yeah.
Make your co-workers greedy.
Yeah.
And your
All right.
best advocates are children themselves.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. I'm going to hand you back over to Michelle now.
Okay.
Thank you, Eleanor. That was absolutely amazing. And what an amazing legacy you're creating in the Netherlands and across the world. Please join me, everybody, in thanking Dr. Eleonoor van Gerven for her great session and generosity in sharing her insights and expertise in improving student wellbeing at school. Thank you. It's been a really great having you with us today, Eleanor.
Thank you for having me.
See you soon.
Okay.
So that brings us to the conclusion of our third webinar in the 2025 Gifted Education Symposium series. Our fourth webinar will be on Thursday, the 6th of November, 7:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. Australian Standard Time, with Professor Del Sigley presenting on increasing motivation in students. We look forward to seeing you all then. Thanks so much for your attention and attendance today. Bye for now.